Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I never should have stopped for the night. I tell myself that over and over, but at the time, it seemed like the only option. My eyes were burning from exhaustion, my hands gripping the wheel so tight that my knuckles ached. The road had stretched on endlessly, a two-lane blacktop cutting through empty desert, no towns, no gas stations, just a whole lot of nothing. I was dead tired, and the idea of pulling over at a quiet rest stop, just to sleep for a few hours, felt like the responsible thing to do. Now I know better. The rest stop wasn't anything special, just a cracked asphalt lot with faded parking lines, a couple of picnic tables, and a single dimly lit restroom building. There was a flickering street lamp at the entrance, buzzing faintly, casting long, jittery shadows over the pavement. I had the place to myself. That should have been a relief, but for some reason, as soon as I pulled in, an uneasy feeling settled over me. Something about the place felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the trees at the edge of the lot stood too still, their branches not moving, even though I could feel a light breeze. Or maybe it was the fact that there were no signs of life, no bugs flying around the lamplight, no distant sound of crickets, not even the hum of a passing car in the distance. It was silent, too silent. Still, I forced myself to shake off the nerves. I was just overtired, letting my imagination mess with me. I parked the RV at the far end of the lot, away from the road. The engine rumbled as I shut it off, the sudden silence pressing in around me. After locking the doors, I pulled the curtains closed and made my way to the small bed in the back. It didn't take long for sleep to claim me. I don't know how long I was out before I heard the first noise. A soft tap, tap, tap against the windshield. My eyes snapped open, my body frozen under the blankets. For a few seconds, I just listened. Maybe it was the wind or some small branch falling from a tree. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. Slowly, I sat up, straining to hear over the thudding of my heartbeat. The noise was light, delicate, like fingertips drumming against glass. It was coming from the front of the RV. I glanced at my phone, 2:47 a.m. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed in bed, pulled the blankets over my head, and convinced myself it was just my imagination. Instead, I got up. Moving as quietly as possible, I crept toward the front of the RV. The windshield was covered by the curtains, but I could still feel it, that awful sinking sensation of being watched. I hesitated, then reached for the edge of the curtain. Just a small peek. Just enough to prove to myself that there was nothing out there. I pulled the fabric aside and something moved. A shape shifted just outside the windshield. My breath hitched. For a second, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. My brain struggled to process it, like my eyes refused to accept what they were seeing. A hand, thin and pale, with fingers too long, slid down the glass. It moved slow, deliberate, as though savoring the sensation. Then it curled, not in a natural way. The fingers bent at impossible angles, joints shifting unnaturally, almost like they had too many bones. I staggered back, my stomach twisting. My skin crawled with instinctive revulsion, the kind that warns you when something is deeply, deeply wrong. The fingers slowly disappeared from view, retreating into the darkness. I stayed frozen, staring at the windshield, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, a shadow from a tree branch, a hallucination from exhaustion. But I knew better. I reached for my phone, hands shaking as I unlocked it. I turned on the RV's exterior lights, flooding the outside in a harsh white glow. Then I forced myself to look. Nothing. The lot was empty. No footprints. No handprints. No sign that anything had been there at all. But when I turned the lights off and stepped back to bed, I swore I could still feel it. Something just outside, waiting in the dark. Watching. Final lines of the introduction. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, and I didn't know it yet, but that was only the beginning. The long-armed man, gradual suspense build-up. I didn't sleep that night. Even after the long fingers vanished from the windshield, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them curling over the glass again, stretching unnaturally, waiting. By the time the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I was already back behind the wheel. I didn't even bother making coffee. I just wanted to get out of there. The rest stop looked completely normal in the daylight. The cracked pavement, the sun-bleached picnic tables, the empty lot stretching toward the tree line. It felt ridiculous, sitting there in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel like something was going to burst out of the bushes at any second. I forced myself to breathe. Maybe it really had been exhaustion. A trick of the shadows. A half-dream born out of too little sleep. I told myself that as I pulled onto the road and left the rest stop behind. I told myself that, but deep down I didn't believe it. Strange things start happening. The road was empty. For hours, I drove without seeing a single car. Just long stretches of highway, the occasional gas station, and too much open space. I tried to push the night out of my mind. But then the noises started. At first, it was subtle, small creaks from the roof of the RV like something shifting above me. Probably just the wind, I told myself. Or maybe a loose panel rattling in the airstream. But then the scraping started. It wasn't loud, just faint enough that I could barely hear it over the hum of the engine, like fingernails dragging across metal. I turned up the radio. The sound didn't stop. It followed me for miles, a rhythmic scratch, scratch, scratch that seemed to come from right above the windshield. I tried to ignore it, but then I saw something in the rearview mirror. The first glimpse. A shape moved behind the RV. Just for a split second. A tall, thin figure stepping onto the road, just barely illuminated by the morning light. I blinked, heart hammering. By the time I looked again, it was gone. I gripped the wheel tighter, my throat dry. It had been too far back to see any details, just a silhouette, stretched and unnatural, but undeniably there. I kept driving, faster, but no matter how many miles I put between myself and that rest stop, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The handprint. By midday, I was exhausted. I pulled into a gas station, one of those old, run-down places where the pumps looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. The clerk barely looked up as I walked inside, grabbing a bottle of water and some snacks. I tried to act normal, but when I stepped back outside, I froze. There was a handprint on my windshield. Long fingers, smudged against the glass, too high up for a normal person to reach. I whipped my head around, scanning the lot. Nothing. No one. Just the hum of the gas station sign flickering overhead. I wiped the handprint away with my sleeve, my skin crawling. Then, without wasting another second, I got back in the RV and pulled onto the highway. Night falls again. By the time the sun started setting, I realized something horrifying. I had nowhere to go. The next town was still hours away, and there were no motels or rest stops in sight. Just more endless highway, stretching on into the dark. I checked the gas gauge. Half a tank. Enough to keep driving, but not enough to make it to the next city without stopping somewhere. I didn't want to pull over. Not after last night. But as the sky darkened and my eyes grew heavier, I knew I didn't have a choice. I found a small turnout on the side of the road, just big enough to park. A few scattered trees, a patch of dirt, and nothing else. I told myself it was temporary, just a quick nap before I kept going. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains shut, settled into the bed, and then I heard it, the tapping, soft at first, then louder, a slow, deliberate drumming against the glass. Tap, 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 right against the windshield, right above me. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart racing. It's just the wind, I told myself, just my imagination. Then I heard the worst sound yet. Something shifted on the roof. A slow, dragging noise, like flesh against metal. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel it now, the awful, suffocating certainty that there was something above me. Something too big. Something waiting. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The roof creaked again. And then, a shadow passed across the curtain. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The shadow outside the curtain stretched across the dim interior of the RV, its fingers curling unnaturally long along the fabric. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light, a branch swaying in the wind. But I knew better. Branches didn't move like that. They didn't tap. Tap, tap, tap. A slow, deliberate sound. Knuckles against glass. I swallowed hard. Then silence. I stayed still for a long time, counting the seconds in my head. 30, 40, a minute. Nothing. Forcing my limbs to move, I reached for the curtain with shaking fingers. Pulled it back. The windshield was empty. No handprints. No figures. No movement. Just an empty, moonlit road stretching into the darkness. But then I saw it. A single, smudged fingerprint. Too large. Too long. Right where I had last seen those fingers. The descent into fear. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not after that. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared over the horizon, I was already back behind the wheel, pushing the RV onto the road. I told myself I just needed to get to the next town. A diner, a gas station, anywhere with people. But the road felt too empty. For the first time since I had started my trip, I noticed how isolated everything was. No other cars, no signs of life, just endless stretches of asphalt disappearing into the morning fog. And then it started again, the scraping, that same horrible sound from the night before, like fingernails dragging across metal. But this time, it wasn't coming from above me. It was coming from behind. I flicked my eyes up to the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. There was something standing in the road. It was far back, but I could see it clearly. A tall, thin figure. Unnaturally thin. Its arms were too long, hanging past its knees, fingers dangling like heavy ropes of flesh. And even from this distance, I could tell it was watching me. I slammed my foot on the gas. The RV lurched forward, the engine roaring as I sped down the empty road. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out, but I didn't dare take my eyes off the mirror. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, frozen in place, like it had been waiting for me to see it. Then, just as I was about to lose sight of it in the distance, it tilted its head, not a normal movement, a slow, sickening bend, like its neck had too many joints. And then, it took a step, the impossible chase. I had to be seeing things, had to be hallucinating, because there was no way something could move like that. Its arms didn't swing the way a person's should. They just dragged. Its fingers trailed along the ground as it took long, unnatural strides, like it wasn't walking but gliding forward. And the worst part, it was keeping up. I was going 80 miles an hour, and it was still there, still following, still getting closer. I clenched the wheel, my knuckles white. Then it disappeared. 1 second, it was in the mirror. The next gone. I exhaled, trying to catch my breath. Maybe I had outrun it. Maybe. Something slammed onto the roof. It's on the RV. I nearly lost control. The entire vehicle lurched, swaying violently as a heavy thud reverberated through the ceiling. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel to steady myself. Then the footsteps started. Not normal footsteps. Not the sound of boots or sneakers or even bare feet. Something dragging. A slow, deliberate pulling sound, as if something too long was crawling across the top of the RV. I turned the wheel wildly, swerving left and right, trying to shake whatever was up there off. It didn't move, didn't stumble, didn't fall, just kept crawling. A low, scraping sound dragged across the roof, right above my head. It was bending down, reaching, trying to get inside. I slammed on the brakes. The RV screeched to a stop, tires skidding against the asphalt. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a hand slapped against the windshield. Face to face with it, I gasped, my entire body seizing in terror. The fingers were too long. They splayed out, unnaturally stretched, the knuckles bending in ways they shouldn't. The hand slid downward, leaving a greasy, inhuman smear. And then, the face appeared. Or rather, what should have been a face. No eyes, no mouth, just skin. A stretched, featureless mask of flesh. It pressed against the glass, tilting its head in that same horrible way, as if trying to see me without eyes. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, and then its fingers curled, knuckles popping, scraping against the windshield, and it started to knock. Tap, 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 rhythmic, slow, patient, like it was asking me to let it in. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't just knocking anymore. It was testing the glass. I could hear the subtle change in pressure, the way its fingers lingered on the windshield, pressing, dragging, stretching. It wanted inside. The engine. I needed to start the engine. My fingers fumbled for the keys, hands slick with sweat. I turned them hard, the ignition clicking once, twice. Nothing. No. 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 I turned them again. Click. 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 Dead. A sound bubbled up in my throat, something between a sob and a curse. Outside, the long fingers spread wider across the glass. They didn't leave fingerprints, just streaks of something dark. It tilted its head again, as if considering me, deciding how to get in. And then, it started pulling itself downward, the horror at the windshield. I should have looked away. I should have shut my eyes, done anything but watch. But I was frozen, my gaze locked onto that awful, stretching thing as it slid further down the windshield. At first, I thought its arms were just impossibly long, that its elbows were somewhere above the roof, its shoulders perched on the very top of the RV. But that wasn't right. It didn't have shoulders. The arms just kept going, twisting, coiling like sinewy ropes of flesh. And worse, they were still moving. They weren't just reaching downward. They were growing, extending, curling along the edges of the windshield, fingertips tapping against the side windows now, boxing me in, caging me inside my own RV. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then, the glass cracked. The first break. At first, it was just a hairline fracture, spiderwebbing from the place where its fingers had pressed the hardest. But then the crack spread, like veins creeping outward. The tapping turned into a slow, deliberate pressing. The windshield bowed inward slightly, bending under the pressure. It wasn't knocking anymore. It was pushing. A whimper escaped my lips. No, no, no. I tried the keys again, twisting so hard I nearly snapped them off. Click, click, click. Nothing. The long arms wrapped further, stretching along the entire side of the RV now. The fingers, those endless fingers, reached toward the side mirrors, curling like claws. They wanted inside. And then, a sound. A low, horrible creaking. Like wood bending. Like something splitting apart. And I realized, with a stomach-churning horror, it wasn't just breaking the windshield. It was peeling the RV open. The escape plan. Move. Move. I forced my limbs to work, scrambling for my bag, my phone, anything. I could still run. I could still. The driver's side door yanked outward. I screamed. Something had grabbed it from outside, wrenching it open with impossible strength. The long fingers whipped inside, grasping at the air, reaching for me. I threw myself backward, scrambling over the center console and into the tiny space behind the driver's seat. The thing didn't hesitate. It lunged forward, its arms stretching deeper into the RV, hands groping blindly, feeling their way over the seats, the dashboard, the steering wheel. I kicked at them. They didn't react, didn't recoil, didn't flinch. They just kept coming. I had to get out. I spun toward the back of the RV, my mind racing. The bathroom. The emergency exit. The goddamn fire extinguisher. Something grabbed my ankle, dragged into darkness. Cold. That's the only way I can describe it. The second those fingers wrapped around me, I felt it. A deep, paralyzing cold that seeped through my skin, straight into my bones. It wasn't normal. Wasn't natural. It felt like my body was being drained. Like something was leaving me. And then it pulled. Not hard. Not fast. Just a slow, patient dragging. Like it had all the time in the world. I screamed, kicking wildly, my heels slamming against the floor, the cabinets, anything I could reach. It didn't stop. Didn't let go. The fingers tightened. I felt nails against my skin, pressing just hard enough to break the surface. And then, a blinding flash. The last attempt. For a second, I didn't understand what had happened. Then I realized, the headlights. They were on. Not just on, flooding the entire RV with light. The fingers jerked back instantly. The grip around my ankle vanished. I scrambled away, gasping, my body shaking so hard I thought I might pass out. The long arms retracted, snapping backward like something yanked them into the night. And then, silence. What was left behind? I didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, shaking, staring at the open driver's side door. The night was still. No movement. No sound. But then I saw it. A single smear of dark liquid on the dashboard. It wasn't blood. Not exactly. It was thicker, darker, like something had bled shadows. And then I noticed something else. The cracks in the windshield. They weren't just random fractures anymore. They had formed a shape. A rough, smeared outline of a hand. Fingers too long. Knuckles bent at impossible angles. Like something had been trying to pull itself inside. I knew what I had to do. I had to get the hell out of there. Final lines of the climax. I didn't look back as I started the RV. Didn't check the mirrors. Didn't wonder where it had gone. I just drove. And in the back of my mind, a single, terrifying thought whispered through me. What if it wasn't gone? What if it was just waiting? One, to drive into darkness. I didn't look in the mirrors. Didn't check the rear view. Didn't stop. I just drove. The RV rattled over the cracked highway, the headlights cutting through the endless blackness of the night. The dashboard glowed a dim green, the cracked windshield a fractured web in front of me. The handprint was still there, a dark stain smeared across the glass, like something had been pressed against it from the inside. I kept my eyes forward. My hands clamped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles burned, but I didn't loosen my grip, not even for a second. I knew if I checked the mirrors, I would see something. And if I saw it, it would see me too. The gas station stopped. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time didn't feel real anymore. The gas gauge hovered on empty, and despite every instinct screaming at me to keep driving, I had no choice. The next gas station appeared on the side of the highway, a flickering neon sign buzzing open 24 hours, casting a sickly green glow over the lot. I pulled in fast, rolling up beside a pump. I killed the engine. Silence rushed in like a vacuum. My breath hitched. I sat still, ears straining. Nothing. No tapping. No scratching. No unnaturally long fingers creeping toward the windshield. For the first time all night, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was safe. But when I reached for the door handle, a hand gripped my wrist. The stranger who knows. I nearly screamed. But the hand wasn't cold. Wasn't too long. It was a man's. A normal man's. I turned, gasping. An old attendant stood outside my window, his wrinkled face twisted in concern. His grip on my wrist was tight, but not threatening. "You don't want to be out here too long, son." His voice was low, grave. I swallowed, my throat dry. "What?" His eyes flickered toward my windshield, toward the dark stain. He pulled his hand away fast, stepping back like he had touched something dangerous. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You saw it, didn't you?" Cold dread ran through me. My stomach twisted. I licked my lips, trying to force words out, but nothing came. The old man nodded, like he already knew my answer. He glanced over his shoulder, at the empty highway, the stretching woods beyond. Then he leaned in. "Don't stay in one place too long. It follows." My heart nearly stopped. "Well, what follows?" He didn't answer, just looked at my windshield one last time, then turned and walked back toward the station. I didn't fill the tank. I didn't move. I just sat there, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then, a noise. Not outside, not from the windshield, from behind me, inside the RV. The shape in the rear view, the breath in my lungs froze. I felt it before I heard it, a weight in the back of the RV, a shift in the air, a presence. I forced myself to stay still, not to turn, not to look, but I couldn't stop my eyes. They flicked toward the rearview mirror, and there it was, a shape in the shadows, something hunched low in the back, just beyond the seats. Something watching me. I knew it wasn't a trick of the light, because when I saw it, it moved, slowly, deliberately. Its arms unfolded. They stretched outward, creeping along the cabinets, the walls, the ceiling. Too long, too thin. It had never left. It had been inside the whole time, and it was waiting, nowhere left to run. The air turned thick, suffocating. I tried to move, tried to throw the door open to run, but the engine wouldn't start. The keys were in my hand. I turned them. Click, click, click. Dead. My breath hitched. I could hear it shifting in the back now. Long fingers dragging across the walls. Reaching, stretching, moving toward me. I turned the keys again, harder, desperate. Click, click, click. And then, tap, tap, tap. I stopped breathing. Not from the rearview mirror. Not from the windshield. From the ceiling. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up and saw it. The fingers, pressing down from above, sliding through the cracks in the ceiling vent, spreading wide, stretching toward me. The lights flickered. My vision blurred. And then, darkness. The final uncertainty. I don't know how long I was out. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? All I know is, when I woke up, the RV was running. The engine was purring, the radio humming low static, and the windshield? Perfectly clean. No handprint. No cracks. No sign anything had ever been there. But my body hurt. My ankle throbbed where it had grabbed me. And my arms, bruises. Dark, finger-shaped bruises wrapping around my wrists. Like something had held me down. I didn't look in the mirrors. Didn't check the rear view. I just put the RV in drive. And never stopped. The final uncertainty. I don't know how long I was out. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? All I know is, when I woke up, the RV was running. The engine was purring, the radio humming low static, and the windshield? Perfectly clean. No handprint. No cracks. No sign anything had ever been there. But my body hurt. My ankle throbbed where it had grabbed me. And my arms, bruises. Dark, finger-shaped bruises wrapping around my wrists. Like something had held me down. I didn't look in the mirrors. Didn't check the rear view. I just put the RV in drive. And never stopped. Next story. A journey with no destination. If you've ever spent a night alone in an RV, parked in some dark, quiet place, you know the feeling. The silence isn't comforting, it's suffocating. The walls feel too thin. The windows feel too open. You lock the doors, check the curtains, tell yourself you're safe. But the thing about traveling alone is that sometimes you're not really alone. My name is Evan, and I've been living on the road for the past 6 months. I sold my house, left behind my old life, and turned this RV into my home. There's something freeing about driving with no set destination, stopping wherever the road takes you. The world becomes smaller. You start noticing things you wouldn't in a normal life. How gas stations hum late at night, how the trees shift in the wind, how even the emptiest parking lot never really feels empty. I told myself I wasn't running from anything, but maybe deep down I was. Maybe the road felt safer than staying still. That was before I saw something in my rearview mirror that shouldn't have been there. The first glimpse. It started a week ago, somewhere outside of Colorado. I had pulled into a rest stop off the highway. A quiet place, just a few trucks parked under buzzing streetlights. It was late, and I was too tired to keep driving. I did my usual checks before settling in. Doors locked. Yes. Curtains drawn. Yes. Anything weird outside? Nothing. I turned off the engine, stretched, and let out a long sigh. Just another night on the road. Then, as I reached for my phone, my eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror. There was a shadow in the back of the RV. It was just for a split second, a dark shape sitting at the edge of the bed. But the moment I turned around, it was gone. My heart pounded in my chest. I forced a laugh. Jesus, Evan, you're just tired. I checked the back. Nothing. The bed was empty. The bathroom door was open. No one was here. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The subtle signs. I tried to push it out of my head. People see weird things when they're exhausted. It's just shadows playing tricks. That's what I told myself as I lay in bed, the hum of passing trucks lulling me to sleep. But then came the breathing. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it was too steady, too close. A slow, rhythmic sound, just behind me, like someone lying beside me, exhaling softly. I held my breath. The sound continued. There was someone else in here. I bolted upright, fumbling for my phone flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating an empty bed. No one. I turned the light toward the bathroom. Door wide open. Nothing inside. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to calm down. It was nothing. The wind, the engine cooling down, my own paranoia. Nothing. Still, I double-checked the locks before I finally let myself drift off to sleep. The passenger gets comfortable. The next morning, I almost convinced myself I had imagined it all. But then, as I climbed into the driver's seat and glanced into the rearview mirror, I saw it again. This time, it wasn't just a fleeting shadow. It was a shape, a human-like silhouette, hunched slightly in the back. I turned so fast my neck cracked, but nothing. The bed was empty. The space where it had been sitting was undisturbed. But the feeling it left behind, that stayed. That day, I kept the radio on louder than usual, trying to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. But no matter how many times I checked the mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was riding with me. And every time I looked back, it was getting clearer. The unspoken rule. I tried to pretend it wasn't happening. Maybe if I ignored it, it would go away. But then strange things started happening inside the RV. The air felt colder at night, like someone had left a window open. A faint musty smell lingered, like old fabric left in the rain. My belongings moved. I'd leave my phone on the table, only to find it on the couch. My keys ended up on the floor, and I swore I had left them hanging by the door. Worst of all, I started waking up in different places. One morning, I woke up in the driver's seat. I didn't remember getting up. Another night, I found myself standing in the middle of the RV, awake, but not really. Just standing, staring at the bed, where I swore I saw an indentation, like someone had just been lying there. That was when I set a rule for myself. I stopped looking in the rearview mirror at night, because each time I did, the shape in the back grew sharper, and I didn't want to see its face. One last look. A few nights later, I pulled into a small, empty lot outside of a diner. I needed rest, a real night's sleep. I went through the motions, locked the doors, closed the curtains, checked the back, before settling in. But that night, I made a mistake. I looked. I don't know why. Maybe part of me needed to know. Maybe I thought I could prove to myself that nothing was there. But when I glanced into the mirror, the shadow wasn't sitting in the back anymore. It was closer, right behind the passenger seat. And this time, it was facing me. Final thoughts before the fear fully sets in. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The moment stretched into eternity. And then, the RV creaked. Not from the wind, not from shifting weight. It creaked like something was moving toward me. I spun around. Nothing. The space was empty. The bed was untouched. The passenger seat was just a seat. But I knew it was there. I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. I turned the key so fast my fingers fumbled. The engine roared to life, and I sped away from that lot like I was being chased. I didn't stop driving until the sun started to rise. The passenger never leaves. That was 2 days ago. I haven't stopped moving since. I tell myself that if I don't stop for too long, if I don't let the silence settle, it won't catch up. But deep down, I know that's not true. Because every time I glance in the mirror, the passenger is still there. And every night, it gets a little clearer. The road no longer feels empty. I kept driving. I don't know where I was going, just forward. Away from that parking lot, away from whatever had been in the mirror. But the thing about the road is that it doesn't let you escape. It just stretches ahead, mile after mile, like it's watching you run. By the time the sun had fully risen, my hands were aching from how tightly I had been gripping the wheel. My mind was running in circles, trying to rationalize what I had seen. Had I been sleep deprived? Maybe. Had I hallucinated a shadow? Could be. Had I really heard the RV creak behind me? That one I couldn't explain. I told myself I'd been paranoid, my own nerves playing tricks on me. It wasn't like I had actual proof that something was inside my RV. But that was before I checked my phone's camera roll. The photo I don't remember taking. When I finally stopped at a gas station later that morning, I went inside to grab some coffee. The attendant gave me a look when I stumbled in, like I'd been driving too long without sleep. She wasn't wrong. I paid for the coffee, stepped back outside, and leaned against the RV, taking a deep breath. Everything was normal. Bright morning sun, the faint scent of gasoline and dust in the air, cars passing in the distance. I pulled out my phone, scrolling mindlessly through my messages. Then, without thinking, I tapped my camera roll. That's when I saw it. A photo, taken at 3:42 a.m., a dark, grainy shot of the RV's interior. I hadn't taken it. At least, I don't remember taking it. And in the photo, in the back of the RV was a shape, a shadow, sitting exactly where I'd seen it in the mirror. The smell of something that shouldn't be there. I didn't check the back of the RV before getting back on the road. I couldn't, because if I turned around and actually saw something, what the hell was I supposed to do? Instead, I threw the RV into drive and got the hell out of there. The next few hours blurred together. I blasted music, kept my eyes on the road, did everything I could to ignore the creeping sensation that someone was still sitting behind me. Then, around midday, the smell started. Faint at first, like damp clothes left out in the rain. I cranked down the window, hoping it was just something outside. But within minutes, it got stronger. Rotting wood, mold, a damp, musty stench. It smelled old, like something that had been locked away for years. Forgotten. I reached over, turned on the AC. Nothing helped. And the worst part, no matter how hard I tried not to, I could feel my eyes being pulled toward the mirror. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did. And the shadow, it was closer, not in the back anymore. Now it was in the middle of the RV, sitting on the small couch, still hunched, still motionless, still watching, doors that don't stay locked. That night, I parked at a well-lit truck stop. No more empty lots, no more remote areas. People were around. I could hear truckers talking, smell fast food from the diner nearby. It made me feel safer. For the first time in days, I tried to act normal. I made some food, scrolled through my phone, let my mind settle. But something was off. I don't know how long it took me to realize it, but when I finally did, my stomach turned to ice. The RV door was unlocked. I always locked it the moment I parked. Every single time. And yet, there it was slightly open. Just enough for a thin crack of darkness to peek through. I slowly walked to the door, heart hammering. I pushed it shut, locked it, yanked the handle to be sure. Locked. I turned back toward the RV interior, and in the rearview mirror, the shadow was standing. Not sitting anymore. Standing in the middle of the RV. Sleep paralysis, or something else. I barely slept that night. I kept the lights on, the TV running, anything to keep the silence from settling in too deep. At some point, exhaustion finally won, and I dozed off. And that's when it happened. I woke up to a weight pressing against my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Something was in the room with me. I could feel it, the pressure of its presence. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. And then the whispering started. Not words, not even a voice, just the sound of breath, inches from my face. Hot, slow, like something was leaning over me just watching. My eyes darted around, but I couldn't see anything. My body refused to move. And then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The weight lifted. The room returned to normal. I gasped, sucking in air, sitting up so fast I nearly fell off the bed. But as I turned toward the mirror, my breath caught in my throat. The reflection of the RV interior was wrong. Because in the mirror, the shadow was still there, standing right behind me. It wants me to acknowledge it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I booked a motel room. I needed to be somewhere else. Away from the RV, away from it. The room was nothing special, just a cheap roadside motel with dim yellow lights and an old TV. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt relief. I showered, ate something that wasn't gas station food, forced myself to breathe, and for a few hours, I almost convinced myself that I had left whatever it was back in the RV. But then I made the mistake of checking the mirror. Not the one in the RV, the one in the motel room. Because in its reflection, the shadow wasn't in the RV anymore. It was here, in the motel room, sitting in the corner, closer than ever. It didn't stay in the RV. I should have left. I should have grabbed my keys, gotten back in the RV, and driven as far away as possible. But my body wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the motel mirror. At it, the shadow sat hunched in the corner of the reflection, even though the corner of the room was empty. I turned, looked at the actual corner. Nothing. But when I looked back at the mirror, it was still there. It hadn't stayed in the RV. It had followed me. It's watching me sleep. I barely remember forcing myself to sleep that night. I left the bathroom light on, kept the TV playing low, did everything I could to drown out the feeling that I was being watched. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I thought it was just a bad dream. But then I noticed the air felt thick, heavy, like someone was standing in the room with me. I reached for my phone, but my fingers fumbled. The screen lit up for just a second, and that's when I saw it. The shadow, not in the corner this time. It was closer, right next to my bed. I squeezed my eyes shut, told myself I was dreaming. But when I opened them again, the closet door was open. I hadn't opened it. I had checked before getting into bed. My pulse pounded in my ears. The closet was just a few feet away, its darkness stretching deep, deeper than it should have. And I swore I saw something move inside it. Not fast, not sudden, just the slow, subtle shift of something pulling itself deeper into the shadows. I stayed awake until morning, and when I finally worked up the nerve to check the mirror again, the shadow was gone. The RV feels different. I thought about leaving the RV behind, just taking my bags, my money, and figuring something else out. But I couldn't. Something in me wouldn't let me. It felt like it wanted me to come back. When I finally stepped inside, I noticed it immediately. The smell was worse. Damp, moldy, like old wood rotting in a basement. The air felt thicker, like the walls had closed in an inch. And the silence, God, the silence. It was as if the RV was holding its breath, waiting. I moved slowly, checking every corner, making sure I was alone. The furniture was just as I had left it, except the couch cushions were sunken, like someone had been sitting there for a long time. The scratches. I started driving, but something felt off. The RV didn't feel empty anymore. The road stretched ahead, long and endless, the white lines blurring under my tires. I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to check the mirror. But then, just beneath the hum of the engine, I heard it, a slow, dragging sound, like fingernails scraping against wood. I stiffened. My hands tightened on the wheel. The sound was coming from the back, from the couch. I swallowed hard, forced myself to ignore it. But the scraping didn't stop. It continued, steady, rhythmic, as if something was lazily tracing lines into the wooden paneling. And then, a thump, a single, soft thud against the wall, like a hand pressing against it. I finally broke. I yanked the wheel to the side, pulled the RV onto the shoulder, and threw it into park. My breath came fast, uneven. My pulse thundered in my ears. Slowly, I turned. The couch was empty, but as I stepped closer, my stomach lurched. Because on the wooden paneling behind the couch, there were scratches, thin, jagged marks, like fingernails had been dragged across it, over and over again. Some were fresh. Others had been there a long time. Long before I bought this RV. The footsteps. I refused to sleep in the RV that night. I found another truck stop, parked beneath the brightest lights I could find, and locked myself inside. I tried to sleep. I really did. But then, just past midnight, I heard them. Footsteps. Slow. Careful. Inside the RV. I held my breath. My body was frozen, my limbs locked in place. The footsteps moved toward me. Soft, deliberate. Stopping just outside the thin partition that separated my sleeping area from the rest of the RV. I could feel it standing there. Waiting. Watching. Waiting for me to acknowledge it. I squeezed my eyes shut. Didn't move. The silence stretched so long I thought I might scream. And then, a whisper. Not words. Just breath. Right against the partition. Then the footsteps retreated. Back to the couch. And the RV went silent again. It's getting stronger. I don't know how much more of this I can take. I tried researching the RV's history, but I found nothing. No records, no previous owners. It's like it never existed before I bought it. And I swear to God, it's getting stronger. The reflections in the mirror aren't just shadows anymore. They're clearer. At night, I see fingers tapping against the window in my peripheral vision. When I wake up, I find new scratches on the walls. And today, when I got back from a rest stop, the couch wasn't empty. I didn't see it at first. I stepped inside, set my bag down, turned toward the kitchen, and then I froze, because something moved. Just barely. A shift in the air. I turned my head just a fraction. And there, on the couch, was a hand. Not a shadow, not a blur. A real, solid, human hand. It rested on the armrest, pale fingers curled against the fabric, as if it had always been there, as if it belonged. I blinked, and it was gone. It's not letting me go. I don't know what to do. I can't leave the RV. Every time I try, something pulls me back. It's like I'm stuck. And the worst part, I think it knows. It knows I see it. It knows I hear it. And it's waiting for me to admit it's real. Because tonight, when I looked in the mirror, for the first time, the shadow wasn't just sitting. It was standing. And it was facing me. It knows that I see it. I should have never looked in the mirror. The moment my eyes locked onto the reflection, everything changed. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had shape. Not a full figure, not yet, but I could make out details. A head, a long thin neck, and arms that stretched impossibly far, fingers resting against the couch's armrest, as if it had been there all along. But the worst part, it was looking at me, not facing forward, not hunched in the corner, looking, right, at me. It knew I saw it, and now I couldn't unsee it. The smell of rotting wood. The RV's air grew thick, like stepping into a room with no oxygen. I stumbled back, gasping, but the smell only grew stronger. Damp wood, mold, rot, the kind of scent you find in places that have been abandoned for years. I covered my nose, trying to breathe through my sleeve, but it was inside me. I felt it sinking into my skin, pressing into my chest. I turned toward the couch. The shadow was gone from the mirror, but I could still feel it, closer than before. I forced myself to move, to grab my keys and get the hell out. But the moment my hand touched the door, thud, a single, heavy impact against the back of the RV, like something had slammed into it from the outside. My breath caught. My fingers hovered over the lock. Silence. Then, another thud, louder, closer, coming from the inside, from the couch. The passenger is here. I turned, stomach twisting, hands shaking. The couch was empty, but the cushions were sunken deeper than before, like something heavy was sitting there. The air warped around it. The shadows along the walls stretched toward it. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. My tongue felt too thick in my mouth. Then, it moved. Not a lot. Not fast. Just a slow, deliberate shifting of weight, like someone adjusting their position. My breath hitched. My legs screamed for me to run. But then, the couch creaked, and I heard it. For the first time, I heard it. A slow, wheezing breath. Deep. Labored. Like lungs filled with water. I stepped back. My heel hit the kitchenette counter. The breath stopped. Silence. Then, the cushions lifted, like it was standing up. It wants me to stay. I bolted. Didn't think, just moved. My fingers fumbled with the lock, yanking the door open, ready to run into the night. But something grabbed me. Not my body. Not my clothes. My breath, like the air had been sucked from my lungs. I tried to inhale, couldn't. My vision blurred. My head spun. I stumbled, fell against the door frame, nails digging into the metal, trying to pull myself out. Then I felt it. Behind me. A presence. Close. So close. A breath, wet and ragged, right against my ear. Then, a voice. Not in words. Just a whisper. Stay. I felt my body weaken, my grip slipping. I was being pulled back in. I wasn't escaping. I was being claimed. The hands in the dark. Somewhere, deep inside me, something snapped. I slammed my elbow back, hitting nothing but air. But the pressure broke. I gasped, stumbled forward, tumbled out of the RV. The second my feet hit the dirt, I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't breathe. I sprinted toward the gas station, the bright lights burning spots into my vision. My legs screamed, my lungs ached. Then, the cold hit me. The air around me froze. My body locked up, and before I could react, something grabbed my ankle. Fingers. Thin. Cold. Stretching out from beneath the RV. I screamed, kicked wildly, but the grip tightened. I felt myself being dragged backward, toward the open door, toward the dark. The lights of the gas station seemed so far away now. I clawed at the gravel, dirt biting under my fingernails. My shoe slipped off, and for just a second, the hand hesitated. That was all I needed. I lunged forward, scrambling onto the pavement, tearing myself free. I didn't stop, didn't dare look back. I ran until I collapsed beneath the fluorescent glow of the gas station, gasping for breath. And when I finally turned, the RV door was closed. The inside was pitch black, but something shifted behind the windshield. A shape, sitting in the driver's seat, watching, waiting, because it knew. I wasn't free. Not yet. Something is still in the RV. I don't remember how long I sat under the harsh glow of the gas station's lights, breathing, shaking, waiting for my heart to stop feeling like it was about to explode. The RV sat where I had left it, quiet. No movement, no shadow in the windshield, no sign of the thing that had grabbed me. But I wasn't stupid. I knew it was still there, watching, waiting, and worst of all, I knew it wouldn't let me leave. Not really. Trapped in my own mind. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was just sleep deprived. Maybe it had been a trick of the light. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The weight on my chest. The sensation of being watched. Even out here, beneath the buzzing gas station lights, I felt like I hadn't really escaped. Like something was still wrapped around me, lingering, sinking into my skin. I needed to get away. Far away. But how? My phone was in the RV. My wallet, too. And the keys. I had nothing, except that feeling. That heavy, inescapable feeling that if I stepped back inside, I wouldn't come out again. At least not as myself. The only way out. I couldn't stay at the gas station forever. I had two choices. One, walk. Find a motel. Figure things out in the morning. Two, go back inside. Get my stuff. Risk everything. It wasn't really a choice. I needed my phone. I needed my keys. I needed to get the hell out of here. So, I did the dumbest thing imaginable. I stood up. I turned toward the RV. And I took a step forward. The RV feels different now. I reached the door. My hand trembled over the handle. The metal felt colder than it should, like touching something that had been left in the freezer. A deep, biting cold. I swallowed hard and pressed my ear against the door. Silence. No movement inside. No breathing. I inhaled sharply and pushed it open. The second I stepped inside, I knew. I wasn't alone. The passenger is waiting. The air inside the RV was wrong. It felt thicker, heavier, like walking through water. I forced myself to move. The kitchenette was empty, the bed untouched. I spotted my phone on the counter. I reached for it. Then the lights flickered, just for a second. But in that second, I saw it, the shadow in the mirror, clearer than ever. Not just a shape, not just an outline. A man, tall, thin, and he was smiling. It doesn't need to hide anymore. I spun around. Nothing there. The couch was empty. The air was still. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was closer, no longer sitting, standing, right behind me. I whipped around again, still nothing. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I grabbed my phone, clutching it so hard my knuckles ached. Then, just as I turned for the door, the RV locked itself. It wants me to stay. The locks clicked into place one by one. Click, click, click. I lunged for the handle, yanking it as hard as I could. It wouldn't budge. The air turned colder. The weight in the room shifted. I wasn't alone anymore. And this time, I could feel it behind me. Not just watching, looming. Standing so close I could almost feel its breath against my neck. I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because I knew. If I looked, I wouldn't leave. A whisper in my ear. My body froze. I could hear it breathing. Slow, wet, like lungs filled with water. Then, it spoke. Not out loud, not in any voice I recognized, but in my own head. A whisper. A simple, horrible whisper that made my blood run cold. There's nowhere else to go. The RV becomes a cage. The walls felt like they were closing in. The floor tilted beneath me. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the door handle so tightly my fingers went numb. This isn't real. I had to believe that. I had to fight it. I forced my eyes open, staring at the windshield, at the world outside. It looked so far away now, like I wasn't even on the same plane of existence anymore. Like the RV had pulled me somewhere else. Somewhere where I didn't belong. Where it did. I don't remember leaving. The next thing I remember, I was outside, standing in the middle of the road. The RV behind me, the door wide open. The air was warm again. The sky was clear. It was morning, or had it always been? I didn't know how long I had been standing there. Didn't know how I had gotten out. But my hands were shaking, and my body felt wrong, like something had been inside me. Or, like something still was. It's not over. I didn't go back for the RV. I walked until I found a diner. Sat down. Ordered coffee. Didn't drink it. Didn't move. Just stared at the table, at my reflection on the metal surface of the napkin holder. And that's when I saw it. The shadow. Not behind me. Not in the mirror. In my own reflection. Clearer now. More defined. The passenger who never leaves. It's inside me now. And I don't know if I'll ever get it out. Next story. The fire crackled in the still night air, sending up glowing embers that danced against the vast, empty sky. It was one of those nights where the darkness seemed thicker than usual, pressing in from all sides. Beyond the flickering light of the campfire, the trees loomed tall, their skeletal branches swaying ever so slightly in the unseen breeze. It was perfect. At least, that's what I had thought when we first arrived. We'd been planning this camping trip for weeks, me, Josh, Derek, and Melissa, for friends who needed a break from work, stress, and the monotony of everyday life. We were all city kids, used to the hum of traffic and the glow of streetlights. Out here, though, the world felt ancient, untouched. This spot is legendary, Josh had said as we unloaded the gear. People say the best ghost stories were told around these very flames. I had laughed then, shaking my head. Josh loved that kind of stuff, the weird, the unexplained. He always found the most remote, off-the-grid locations, the kind of places where phone signals were non-existent and civilization felt like a distant memory. But I wasn't complaining. We were here to unwind. Now sitting around the fire, I wasn't so sure. The first flicker. So, what's the story this time? Melissa asked, pulling her hoodie tighter around her. The temperature had dropped sharply, as it always did in the wilderness. The warmth of the fire barely stretched beyond our small circle, leaving the shadows thick and unmoving. Josh grinned, poking at the fire with a long stick. Ever heard of the campfire face? Derek groaned. Of course, you have a story ready. Melissa smirked. Let me guess. Haunted campground? Some murderer lurking in the woods? Josh shook his head. Nah, it's weirder than that. It's about the fire itself. I frowned, shifting on my log. The fire itself? That was new. They say that sometimes, when the flames are just right, Josh continued, you see a face. Not like in the smoke, not some illusion. A real, shifting, living face in the fire. It watches you. It listens. The words settled heavily in the air. The only sound was the crackling wood, the occasional pop of burning sap. I glanced at the fire, feeling a strange prickling along my arms. It was normal, just a fire. But as the embers swirled, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. Supposedly, Josh went on, lowering his voice, if you stare too long, the face remembers you, and then it never really leaves. Melissa scoffed. Creepy, but come on. It's just fire. Derek snorted. Sounds like someone took too many mushrooms and started hallucinating. Josh grinned, shrugging. Maybe. Or maybe they saw something they weren't supposed to. The wind shifted, making the fire flare slightly. Shadows stretched across the ground. For a split second, I swore I saw something move in the flames. It was quick, just a flicker, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I blinked, shaking my head. Just my imagination. Still, I shifted a little farther from the fire. Something in the flames. The night deepened. The firelight was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. The stars were bright, but they felt far away, too far to provide any real comfort. We talked for hours, laughing about old stories, making fun of Josh's conspiracy theories, roasting marshmallows over the flame. It was supposed to be relaxing, but something wasn't right. At first, I thought it was just me. That creeping, uneasy feeling, like being watched from the trailing. Every now and then, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, just outside the fire's reach. The kind of thing your brain tells you to ignore, because looking at it might make it real. But I wasn't the only one. Melissa had stopped laughing as much, her glances flicking toward the fire more often than not. Derek, usually the loudest of us all, had grown quieter, watching the flames with an odd expression. Josh, of course, was grinning like he had just won the lottery. "You see it, don't you?" he said, voice low. Melissa shifted. "See what?" Josh gestured toward the fire. "Look closely. Don't blink." I didn't want to. I really didn't. But against my better judgment, I let my eyes focus on the flame. And that's when I saw it. The fire moved. Not like normal flames licking the air. It twisted, curled in on itself in a way that wasn't natural. And then, a shape. For half a second, I saw it. A mouth, open in a silent whisper. Eyes, hollow and empty. A distorted, shifting face. And it was looking right at me. The first sign of fear. I sucked in a sharp breath and blinked. The face was gone. Just fire again. Dancing embers, licking flames. No one spoke. Then Derek muttered, "What the hell was that?" Melissa shook her head. It was nothing. Just the way the fire moved. But I saw her eyes dart to Josh, searching for reassurance. Josh leaned back, looking satisfied. "Told you." A branch snapped in the woods behind us. We all froze. The fire popped, sending a spray of embers into the air. For the first time, I realized just how quiet the forest had become. No wind, no rustling leaves, no crickets, just the fire, and the faint sound of breathing. Melissa stood abruptly. "All right, this is getting too weird. I'm going to bed." No one argued. We doused the fire, but even as the last of the embers faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still there. Watching, waiting. Final moment, the ashes stir. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure why. The tent was still, the air freezing. My breath came in small, misty puffs. Then I heard it, a soft crackling sound. I turned my head slowly toward the fire pit. The fire was out, but the ashes were shifting. Something moved beneath them. And just before I looked away, I saw a faint glow, like the dying light of embers, or the remnants of watching eyes. A night of unease. The moment my eyes snapped open, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the cold. I had expected that. Out here, the temperature could drop sharply overnight, turning the inside of the tent into an icebox. No, it was something else. A pressure in the air. The fire was out, but a faint glow pulsed in the ashes, like something beneath them was still burning, just barely alive. I turned toward the others' tents. No movement, no rustling of sleeping bags, but I swore I heard breathing. Not mine, not theirs. Something slow, measured, closed. I held my breath, listening. The sound wasn't coming from the tents. It wasn't coming from the woods either. It was coming from the fire pit. A faint inhale, a pause, a slow exhale. My skin prickled. I forced myself to turn away, squeezing my eyes shut. "It's just the wind." I wasn't sure I believed that. Signs of something watching. By morning, everything was normal. Sort of. Melissa was the first one up, brushing her hair out of her face with a yawn. Derek groaned as he stretched, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Josh, of course, looked completely at ease. "Sleep well?" he asked with a smirk. Melissa grumbled something about the cold, but I barely heard her. My gaze was locked on the fire pit. It should have been nothing but blackened logs and dead embers. Instead, the ashes had shifted. Something had been moving in them. At first, I thought it was just the wind scattering the remains of the fire. But then I saw the shape, a vague imprint, barely visible in the gray powder. It almost looked like a face, a faint impression of hollowed eyes, a stretched mouth, as if something had pressed itself into the cooling embers before vanishing into the night. I swallowed hard. Did the others see it? I hesitated before pointing. Does that look weird to anyone else?" Melissa frowned. "What?" Derek squinted, stepping closer. The second his shadow passed over the fire pit, a breeze kicked up, scattering the ashes before he could see anything. "Looks normal to me," he said, rubbing his arms against the cold. Josh glanced at me, smirking. He saw my expression. He knew. Probably just the way the wood settled, he said casually. Come on, let's get breakfast started. I didn't say anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in that fire, and that it had been watching us all night. 3. Unsettling incidents begin. We spent the morning pretending everything was fine. Josh and Derek went to collect more firewood. Melissa and I handled food prep. The sun was high now, pushing away the eerie feeling from the night before. Still, I felt uneasy. That sensation of being watched hadn't gone away. Melissa was unusually quiet, focused on slicing apples for the oatmeal. I didn't realize I had been staring at her hands until she suddenly stopped, sucking in a sharp breath. What? I asked. She held up the knife. Her fingers trembled. I could have sworn the fire was still burning. I blinked. What? She nodded toward the fire pit. I turned slowly. There was no flame, just blackened wood, dead embers. And yet, I smelled smoke, the faintest hint of burning wood. I stepped closer, stomach twisting. Melissa followed. Then, just as I was about to lean in, a log shifted. Not rolled. Shifted, as if something underneath had just moved. Melissa gasped. I yanked her back. Okay, what the hell? We both stepped away as the log settled back into place. The fire pit was still dead, but I could have sworn the ashes were breathing. 4. The fire flickers back to life. The sun was starting to set by the time Josh and Derek returned. We found a great trail a little ways off, Josh said. Leads to a clearing with a perfect view of the lake. Derek grinned, tossing down a bundle of firewood. And no ghosts, by the way. Melissa forced a chuckle, but I saw her glance toward the fire pit again. Neither of us had forgotten what happened. As the sky darkened, we started another fire. At first, everything seemed normal. The wood caught quickly, the flames rising high, casting flickering shadows against the trees. But then, the smoke didn't rise. I didn't notice at first. But as we sat around the fire, I realized the smoke wasn't drifting upward like it should. It was curling, looping back toward the flames, almost as if it was being pulled back in. Josh noticed too. He grinned. Looks like it's coming to life again. I stiffened. Again. Melissa's voice was barely a whisper. It's not just the smoke. I turned toward her, then followed her gaze. The flames were flickering strangely. Not the way fire should move. It wasn't random, chaotic flickering. It was deliberate. It was forming shapes. A long, twisting curl of flame bent inward, then outward, like a mouth opening. A forked wisp of fire split in two, like hollowed eyes. The face was coming back. 5. The growing presence. Josh leaned forward, fascinated. Derek finally noticed. Okay, that's really weird. Melissa grabbed my arm. Put it out. I hesitated. What? She turned to Josh. Put the fire out. Josh frowned. It's just fire, Mel. Put it out. Something in her voice made all of us pause. Then, without another word, she grabbed the water jug and poured it over the flames. The fire sizzled. Smoke rose in a violent cloud, and for a split second, in the billowing smoke, I saw the face clearly. Staring at us, mouth stretched wide, not in a scream, in a grin. 6. The first true disturbance. We sat in silence. The fire was out. The woods were still. Derek chuckled nervously. Okay, that was something. Josh sighed. You guys are getting worked up over nothing. Melissa shook her head, standing up. I'm done. I don't care what you think, something isn't right. I'm going to bed. I wasn't far behind her. Inside my tent, I tried to shake the unease. It was just a campfire story, right? Just our minds playing tricks. I closed my eyes, but as I started drifting off, a faint glow flickered through my eyelids. I turned. The fire pit was dark, but deep in the ashes I saw it, a single ember, glowing, pulsing, like a heartbeat, like an eye, watching me. 1. A sleepless night. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ember, that tiny pulsing glow in the ashes. Watching, waiting. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just leftover heat from the fire, just a trick of the light. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Not after what I saw in the smoke. A face, grinning. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening. Everything outside was quiet. Too quiet. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant chirping, the occasional crack of a twig, were gone. Even the wind had stopped. It was a silence so deep, so unnatural, that it felt alive. I turned over, squeezing my eyes shut. I just needed to sleep. A few hours, and everything would make sense again. Then, from outside the tent, CRRKKK, a slow, deliberate shift in the ashes, right where the fire had been. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't an animal. It was something else. Something moving inside the fire pit. Then, a voice. Not whispered. Not loud. Just there. Come closer. I sat up so fast my head hit the top of the tent. My heart pounded, my skin cold with sweat. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't imagining it. I had heard it. Right outside. By the fire pit. The fire that won't die. I don't know how long I sat there, heart hammering, barely breathing. But when the first streaks of dawn filtered through the tent, I finally forced myself to move. I wasn't the only one awake. Melissa was already outside, arms wrapped around herself. She looked pale, eyes fixed on the fire pit. Derek and Josh were still asleep. I stepped out slowly. Melissa? She didn't answer. I followed her gaze, and my stomach dropped. The fire pit was still smoldering, not from leftover embers. The ashes were burning. Thin tendrils of smoke curled upward, not rising into the air, but twisting back down, sinking into the ground, like the fire was breathing. Melissa turned to me, voice shaky. We put it out. I swallowed. I know. Josh's tent rustled behind us. He yawned loudly as he stepped out, stretching. Morning, Dot. He barely glanced at us before walking past, heading straight for the fire pit. Melissa tensed. Josh, don't. Too late. Josh kicked at the ashes, and the second his foot disturbed them, the fire roared back to life. Not gradually, not naturally. It exploded upward, flames surging as if something had just been fed. Josh stumbled back, cursing. Derek jolted awake from inside his tent. Melissa screamed, because this time, the fire didn't just rise. It formed, a face, clear as day, pushing through the flames. Not smoke, not shifting embers. A fully formed human face. Mouth stretched wide. Not screaming. Laughing. No escape from the fire. We ran. No one said a word. We just ran. Away from the fire, away from the camp, straight into the woods. The moment we crossed the tree line, I felt a change in the air. The silence was gone. Birds chirped. Insects buzzed. The normal sounds of the forest were back. It was like we had crossed into another world. We stopped near a clearing, panting, shaking. Josh was the first to speak. What the hell was that? Derek was pacing, hands on his head. I don't know, man, I don't know. Melissa was gripping my arm, breathing hard. We need to leave. Now. Josh shook his head. No way. We just freaked out, that's all. The fire caught some dry wood, maybe a gas pocket or something. Gas pockets don't make faces, I snapped. He opened his mouth, then shut it. Derek groaned, rubbing his temples. Okay. We pack up, we leave. That's the plan. Everyone nodded. We turned back toward camp. And stopped cold, because between the trees we could see it. The fire. Still burning. Still twisting. Still watching us. We had run deep into the woods. The fire shouldn't be visible. But it was. Right through the trees. Like it had followed us. Melissa grabbed my arm. It's still there. Josh's voice was tight. We left it behind. That's not possible. Derek turned pale. Guys, is it getting closer? I blinked. The flames weren't still. They were moving. A fire that moves. At first, it was just a flicker. Then the flames spread, without touching anything. No logs, no brush catching fire. The flames themselves crept forward, twisting along the ground like fingers. Closing the distance. Coming toward us. Go! I yelled. We tore through the forest, branches slashing at our arms. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. We ran blindly, deeper and deeper, until we finally stumbled onto a dirt path. Melissa collapsed onto her knees, gasping for breath. Derek doubled over, hands on his thighs. Josh spun around, expecting flames. But there was nothing. No fire. No glow. No smoke. Just the trees. The quiet. Did we lose it? Melissa whispered. Josh nodded, still catching his breath. Guess so. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. The final horror of the night. We made it back to camp just before sunset. None of us spoke as we packed. Melissa was shaking as she shoved supplies into her bag. Derek's hands trembled as he folded his tent. Josh kept glancing over his shoulder. Me? I felt numb. Even as I zipped up my bag, even as I stuffed it into the trunk, I felt it. That presence. That thing still watching us. As we piled into the car, Derek muttered, "Let's get the hell out of here." Josh started the engine. And that's when I made the mistake. I turned back, just for a second, just to take one last look at the campsite. The fire was out, the pit was dark, but something moved, a shift in the ashes, a single ember, glowing, pulsing, like an eye, like a heartbeat. Then, right before Josh peeled out of the lot, a thin tendril of smoke curled up from the fire pit, not drifting into the air, not fading. It curled into a smile. Then the wind carried it away, and we drove into the night. The escape that never happened. Josh was driving like a maniac. I couldn't blame him. None of us could. We were getting out of that forest as fast as possible. Melissa kept checking behind us, her breath coming in short gasps. Derek was gripping the dashboard, jaw clenched so tight his teeth might crack. I sat in the back, still shaken, staring at the dark road ahead. No one spoke. No one needed to. We had all seen it. That thing in the fire. That face. That laugh. The road stretched ahead, endless in the glow of the headlights. Trees blurred past us on either side. The only sound was the engine, a constant hum that felt almost reassuring. Until, wait, stop. Melissa's voice cut through the silence. Josh didn't slow down. Not stopping. No way in hell. Melissa pointed at the dashboard. Look at the GPS. I leaned forward. My stomach dropped. The screen showed a single road. One straight road leading out of the forest. But according to the map, we weren't moving. The blue dot that marked our car was stuck. Frozen. As if we hadn't driven at all. Derek sat up. That's gotta be wrong. Josh gritted his teeth, gripping the wheel. Screw the GPS. I know we're moving. But I wasn't so sure. Because something felt off. The trees. The darkness. The way the headlights barely seemed to touch the road. And then, I noticed the smell. That faint, unmistakable scent of smoke. The road that loops. Melissa gasped. Do you see that? I turned to the window, and my blood ran cold. On the side of the road, just barely visible between the trees. Our tents. Our campsite. Still there. Still standing. As if we had never left. Josh slammed the brakes. The tires screeched. We all lurched forward. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, that's not. Derek threw open the door, staggering out onto the road. He turned in circles, wild-eyed. How? We drove straight. We never turned around. Melissa was shaking. We didn't leave, did we? I stepped out of the car, heart hammering. The wind had died. The forest was silent again. And then, from behind us, a low crackle, like embers shifting, like something waking up. The thing in the fire. I turned slowly. Back to the campsite. Back to the fire pit. And I saw it. The fire had started again. We had left it behind, snuffed it out. But now, it was burning. Bigger. Brighter. And the face inside was clearer than ever. It grinned at us. Not just made of flames, but real. Sunken eyes, black and bottomless. A stretched mouth, lined with teeth of glowing embers. Melissa clapped a hand over her mouth. Derek stumbled back. Josh whispered, "This isn't happening." But it was. The face in the fire wasn't just watching us. It was waiting. And then it spoke. We never left. The fire spread. I ran. The others did too. We bolted for the car, but the fire moved faster. Flames erupted across the ground, crawling over dirt and stone without fuel. It blocked the road, blocked the car, blocked any escape. Derek tried anyway, leaping through the fire. But the second he did, he screamed. Not just from pain, from something else. He collapsed, writhing on the ground, clutching his head, his eyes wide with terror. Melissa rushed to him. Derek! I grabbed her arm, yanking her back. Because Derek wasn't screaming anymore. He was laughing, low guttural wrong. Then he stood up, and I saw his eyes. They glowed, like embers, like fire. Melissa whimpered. No, 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 no. Derek turned his head too slowly, his mouth stretching into a wide grin. A grin I had seen before. In the flames. Derek wasn't Derek anymore. And then, he lunged. The final choice. Josh tackled him. They hit the ground hard, rolling through the dirt. Run! Josh yelled. Melissa and I bolted. Branches tore at my arms, my lungs burned. My legs screamed for me to stop, but I didn't. Melissa tripped. I grabbed her, yanking her back up. We crashed through the trees until we saw it. The lake. The one from the map. The one near the entrance. The fire couldn't follow us onto water. Right? I didn't stop to think. We dove in. Cold. Shocking. We surfaced, gasping. The fire was still at the tree-line, but it wouldn't cross. We floated there, shivering, watching, and then the laughter started again. Low, deep, from the fire, and from the woods. A shadow stepped forward. Derek. His body burned, but he wasn't screaming anymore. He just smiled. Josh was nowhere to be seen. And Derek was walking straight into the flames, like it was welcoming him home. Melissa sobbed. What do we do? I didn't have an answer. Because the fire wasn't staying put anymore. It was moving, and it wasn't stopping. Fire and water. We stayed in the lake for what felt like hours. The fire burned along the shoreline, creeping between the trees, casting twisted shadows on the water's surface. It didn't cross the waterline, but it didn't need to. It was watching. Derek stood by the flames, or at least what used to be Derek. His face flickered like embers, his skin glowing in patches of molten orange. His eyes, God, his eyes. They weren't eyes anymore, just black holes surrounded by fire. He smiled at us, and then he spoke. Cold, isn't it? Melissa clutched my arm, shivering violently. I could hear her teeth chattering. My own limbs felt like ice. We couldn't stay in the water forever. But the second we got out, we'd burn. Or worse. It'll be easier if you stop fighting, Derek continued, his voice crackling like dry wood. It doesn't hurt. Not for long. I swallowed hard. My legs were going numb. We were losing time. Melissa whispered, we can't stay here. I knew she was right, but I had no idea what to do next. Because the fire, it wasn't just waiting. It was growing. The flames whispered. The wind picked up, carrying something new across the water. Voices. Not just one. Hundreds. Whispering. Laughing. Chanting. I turned my head, and my stomach dropped. More faces were forming in the flames. Not just one anymore. Dozens. Men. Women. Children. Some old. Some fresh. All burning. Melissa sobbed. What is this? I didn't answer. Because one of the faces, one of them was Josh. His mouth moved, shaping silent words. And for the first time since he vanished, I heard his voice. Help me. Melissa gasped. We have to do something. But what? What the hell could we do? The offer. Derek, or the thing that used to be Derek, tilted his head. You can still leave, he said. One of you. I froze. Melissa did too. We turned to each other, the unspoken horror settling between us. One. Not both. Just one. Decide soon, Derek continued. The fire's getting hungry. Melissa's breathing hitched. No, we're not doing this. We both get out, and neither of us do. I didn't respond, because for the first time, I realized I wasn't sure if that was true. The cold was sinking into my bones. I could barely keep my head above water. My limbs felt heavy, and the fire felt warm, comforting, like a voice in the back of my head whispering, it's easier this way. You're already tired. Just let go. And for a second, a split second, I almost listened. The final choice. The water rippled. Melissa had let go of my arm. She was staring at me, realizing what I was thinking, realizing that I wasn't fighting anymore. Don't, she whispered. Please. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. I looked at her, at the shore, at the burning faces. I saw Josh, Derek, and the countless others who had been here before us. I imagined myself standing there too, glowing, flickering, watching, and then I made my choice. I grabbed Melissa's wrist and shoved her under the water. She screamed. She thrashed, kicking, clawing at my arm, but I held her down. The fire had said one of us could leave, and I knew it wasn't going to be me, the one who leaves. The second Melissa's body went still, the fire changed. The faces screamed. Derek threw back his head, his mouth stretching open, a vortex of flame and smoke. And then, everything went black. I woke up on the road, alone. The sun was rising. The trees were still. The air was crisp. The fire was gone. Melissa was gone. Derek, Josh, all of it, gone, like it had never happened. I stood on shaking legs, turning in circles. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I stumbled toward the car, and it was there, parked perfectly on the side of the road, like we had just arrived, like nothing had happened. I reached for the handle. Then I hesitated, because in the reflection of the window, I saw something behind me, a flicker of orange, a shape, a face, smiling. I turned, but there was nothing there. Just the trees. Just the silence. Just me. And then, I smelled smoke.